Ingo Swann. All of you should know Ingo Swann. Just in case you don't, he was born in the Colorado Rockies, September 14th of 1933. Ingo earned in 1955 a BA degree in biology, after which in Korea he served on the staff of the commander of the Pacific Forces. In 1958 accepted a position at the UN, where he worked in varying capacities until 1969. In 70 he entered a full-time parapsychological and psychoenergetics research program, becoming an acknowledged innovative researcher in these frontier sciences. Swann is also an artist of some renown. His works have been collected by the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. Today, Ingo Swann is internationally known as an advocate and researcher of the exceptional powers of the human mind, and as a leading figure in governmental and scientific projects to investigate and identify the scope of subtle human perceptions. His involvement in government research projects required the discovery of innovative approaches toward the actual realizing of subtle human energies. He views PSI powers as only a parts of the larger spectrum of human sensing systems. As advances are made in mapping the human genome, in genetic manipulation, in cybernetic mind-machine interfaces, and the invention of increasingly smarter machines, he predicts that broad strategic interest in exceptional human powers will emerge as a matter of operational importance. Underline operational importance. He is the author of 11 books. Some have been translated into German, Polish, Dutch, Japanese, Turkish, and French. As I said earlier, regarded as the father of the entire remote viewing program in the U.S. Paul Smith, also with us tonight, served for 7 years in the U.S. government's remote viewing program at Fort Meade, Maryland, from September of 83 to August of 1990. During 1984, he became one of only a handful of government personnel to be personally trained as coordinate remote viewers by Ingo Swann at SRI International. Paul was the primary author of the government RV program CRV training manual. That's right, they actually came up with a manual. Served as theory instructor for new CRV trainee personnel, as well as recruiting officer and unit security officer. He is credited with over 1,000 training and operational remote viewing sessions during his time with the unit at Fort Meade. Two very distinguished gentlemen, Ingo Swann and Paul H. Smith. Gentlemen, welcome. Ingo, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Good. And Paul?
Yes, I'm here too.
Great to have you both on the program once again.
It's good to be here.
Hard to know where to begin with the two of you, but let's actually begin with the ending of the whole government remote viewing program. I'm so extremely interested. I've heard many stories about how and why it ended. Most involve politics and embarrassment to the military and that sort of thing. But you were in it. You must have seen the end coming. What can you two tell me about it?
It's your ball, Paul.
Paul?
You were there.
Yeah, well, I was on the periphery anyway. I had by that time, of course, been transferred on to other jobs in the government, but I kept in touch with the people of the unit, and I dropped in quite frequently. I really didn't know so much what was going on then. It's what I found out afterwards about it.
Okay.
And, it's still pretty much the story of embarrassment and skeptics and high places and that sort of thing. But what's got my interest lately, I'm finishing up the final chapters of the book I'm writing. And in the process, I have to address this. What actually happened in the program? Why did the CIA terminate it? And in the process, I've had to go through their report. They commissioned this organization called the American Institutes of Research. And when you're reading through this report, you see, in fact, they accused parapsychology and remote viewing of being bad science to some extent. Their report itself is very bad science. They didn't do a very good job, and it seems that there was a hidden political agenda there to get rid of the program. And to me, it seems almost irresponsible that they would dispose of something that had actually done some good for American national security.
Let's discuss that aspect of it. How much good had it actually done? What was the record of the program at the time that it got chopped?
Well, the first thing to acknowledge is that it didn't work all the time, and there was times when it didn't work. But when it did work, it was very useful. I'll give you a good example. It's actually kind of a series, an ongoing epic when we did a bunch of work against the counter-narcotics problem. This was in the late 80s, early 90s when narcotics were flooding in the United States. We'd organized 2 joint task forces of military personnel working with local law enforcement. It's kind of an unprecedented sort of thing.
Oh, the drug war was really cranking.
It really was. A lot of money going into it. And someone with a little imagination said, well, why don't we get these guys involved and see what they can do? And in fact, during the trial period, which was basically calendar year 1990, we worked literally hundreds of projects against, counter-narcotics kinds of things. And of the things that we worked, that the Coast Guard and the local law enforcement could actually address. We worked on many more things that they had the resources to send to. They didn't have enough cutters.
Can you give me a specific example? I mean, for example, were you in a situation where you were telling them, look, there's a boat located approximately at the following coordinates or whatever, that's got a load of cocaine, or a plane coming in that's going to land at, here's where we think it's going to. What were you doing exactly?
Let me give you one example. There were a large amount of contraband that was missing. It was known to be hidden on a certain island. And I won't go into great details because I'm not sure exactly how sensitive it still is, but it was known to be on a certain island in the Caribbean. But they didn't have any idea where. And so they tasked the remote viewing unit to describe the situation in which the contraband was and provide a location if at all possible. And in fact, and I have this from one of the operators, not one of the remote viewers or anything, this is what he said essentially, that you remote viewers described the location under a boulder, described the wrappings of the drugs exactly, and even gave, on a diagram of the island, even gave, 2 of us gave the exact location of where the boulder was that the narcotics were hidden under.
Wow.
And he says, that really got my attention.
That would get my attention, too. Now, this discipline, remote viewing, was, I guess, Ingo, you're a natural psychic, aren't you?
I started out that way.
I was told
I, as Dr. Putoff and I and others discovered what could be trained and what should be trained, I got trained too. He was my trainer. I'm a hybrid, a mixture of natural and trained.
Do the 2 of you agree on the following? I know there's some controversy about this. Does an exceptional natural psychic like Ingo Swann make a better remote viewing candidate, or a better person to be trained for remote viewing, or one that perhaps is not as good?
Well, there are several answers to that.
What would yours be?
Well, it depends on the ego of the natural psychic. A lot depends on that. And they have already developed their whatever it is they've developed, and they believe in it, and they don't like the idea that somebody can train them to do better for some reason. It's a very curious response.
The ego.
But if they wanted to be trained, they'd probably make a good trained remote viewer.
That's a good answer. That's a good answer.
People have to want to do it. We found that people should be reasonably intelligent and not slow learners. But we had one slow learner who it just took more time to train, who got the gist of it very well after a time. So it's if you want to, then that's a good place to start. And it doesn't matter if you're a natural psychic or not.
At what point in your life, Ingo, did you realize that you had psychic ability?
At 2.
2 years of age?
Yes.
Gosh, Ingo,
Well, it got me in a lot of trouble, you know. I began, as they say, manifesting phenomena that you weren't supposed to manifest in those days.
Of what sort?
Oh, clairvoyance. Seeing auras around people and telling them a little bit here and there. What's that? What are these butterfly lights flying around and stuff like that? And then there was past lives that I would start to talk about and things. And there's a high incidence of this among children, but they're usually socially trained to repress it or something like that. I never really did, because my maternal grandmother was a great supporter of this stuff. And so I got into my teenage years before I really stopped fiddling with it, and had to be 38 and volunteer for psychic research before it came out again.
How much of a problem at the time you began your training was your ego?
I don't have one. Ask Paul.
Is that right, Paul? He has no ego.
Ingo has no ego whatsoever. No. No. We never encountered that the whole time.
I have a temper and can insist on my way and a few things, but other than that, I'm a very nice person.
So, honestly, asking again, ego was not a problem. You didn't really have to learn to suppress.
It wasn't a problem to me. It might have been to others.
Uh-huh. So you made a very easy transition then with your talents into a more disciplined use of your talents.
Well, when I first started, I volunteered to work in 3 labs in 1970. And I thought, well, you know, this will take 1 or 2 months, and then it'll be all over with. Mm-hmm. And I can get back to doing what I want to do, which was write a best-selling novel at the time. But it just kept on going, and by 1972, I was invited to go to SRI by Dr. Putoff, whom I'd like to say something about at some point here.
Oh, please, go right ahead.
Government agencies were involved, and it was very woo-woo and hush-hush and declared secret and in the national interest and everything. So it really didn't go away in 2 or 3 months, and I just kept following along.
So in other words, there you were in the lab, and Dr. Putoff was testing you, and the government at that point became involved. Do you remember when they first walked in, or when they walked in and got you involved?
They first walked in, so I was told, to the American Society of Psychical Research, and 2 guys came and started asking questions about me. And Mrs. Knipe, who was the director up there at the time, eventually told me about it, but they swore her to secrecy. So their interest began before I went to Putoff and SRI. And in fact, I had a couple other friends who had been approached just after World War II. Some men came by and wanted a list of psychics that they could interview and things like that. So at some level, the government interest goes back a ways.
Ingo, do you know offhand how high the official interest came from? In other words, obviously orders were coming from someplace to begin watching you and others like yourself, and to begin following what you were doing. I wonder how high up that interest came from.
I don't know. Well, I was easy to spot because I'd made headline news in the media in 1972. So, I mean, I wasn't hard to find. But I think that height of interest is probably not ever going to be determined really well, because these guys back then, and probably even now, remember back in 1972, skepticism in the scientific and the mainstream communities against this kind of stuff was really high.
Mm-hmm.
And people lost their jobs if they reflected even an interest in it and things like that. So a lot went on, and we'll never know about it because it was all cloaked in official or unofficial secrecy.
Well, it had to be fairly high. I mean, to begin moving CIA assets, it had to be at some fairly high level. Otherwise, some lower-level bureaucrat, even within the CIA, surely would be risking his job or her job.
Well, there was resistance there was resistance everywhere. And I believe that the research aspect of remote viewing was terminated for a very strange reason, if you'd like me to tell you about it.
I certainly would.
As we went through our discovery process about what could be trained, which, by the way, is not psychic abilities. It's just awareness and perception that can be trained, and everybody's got that. We began to discover, if we say signals can be trained, you can become aware of signals that are telepathic in nature. And so in 1984 and 85, these began to enter into the documentation of what we were researching and things like that.
What kind of signals?
Telepathic. Nobody wants people to read minds. And I know this for a fact that telepathy shall not exist, even if it does, because then there really are no secrets. You know, you can have a secret building somewhere, but if you have telepathy, you don't have any secret minds inside of it.
You know, you're telling me something really new tonight.
Well, it's not new to me, and I've said it many times. But in fact, my 2 volumes on power discuss it a great deal. That sociologically speaking, the greatest fear in the world are adequate telepaths.
Yeah, of course.
If you step back and look at that, you can see why that is.
But very quickly and easily, sure. But I mean, how did that begin to enter into the reports? You began to, give reports of specific people and what they were thinking?
Well, it wasn't that clear-cut at the time. Putoff was the major designer of what we were going to do, and he transferred the whole research aspect away from parapsychology and psychic phenomena over to information theory. And in 1976, I believe it was, or 75, Putoff and Targ read a paper before the IEEE about the discovery of a channel that people have that can input information into their consciousness.
Can you elaborate? I mean, were you reading the minds of military people, or just unknown minds, or channels to what?
Well, don't mistake the word channel for channelers.
Right. No, I am not.
In information theory doesn't refer to meaning of anything. It refers to the clarity of a channel that carries the information. So you have noisy channels and you have not noisy channels. And our discovery process during the SRI period was to deal with the channels and the noise in them so we could get more clear signal. There are 2 kinds of signals, it turns out, and one is, the first kind is based in physicality. Like you can remote view a building and say, okay, there's a building there and it has some stuff in it and things like that. And you can see how this is functioning. If you went to this place, you could see there was a building, right?
Sure.
But what are the people inside of it doing? You know, you can have all kinds of buildings, but you don't know exactly what they're doing inside of it. And the doing part, well, this is a mental thing. This belongs to the mind. And so we can call the physical signals as tangible information about tangible factors. But what people are doing and what they're thinking and what their goals and motivations are is not physical.
No.
It's mental.
Yes.
And it's when you begin to get mental information in a trained remote viewing session, you're actually beginning to deal in telepathy, because that's the distinction between physical clairvoyance, over physical remote viewing.
And when you began to report these sorts of
yes.
This kind of input, then I take it the reception to that was not good.
Well, we sort of had more serious visitors coming out to SRI to see what exactly all this implied, you see.
Yes, I do.
And pretty soon everybody knew what it implied, and I have a cute little story if I can tell it. I had to go to the bathroom one day, so I went in the men's room and was in a stall. Had two visitors, as we used to call them, walked in, and one was raving about what progress had been made, and the other one said, yes, but they're going to be able to read our minds before too long. And I knew that was probably going to be the end of our project, which it was. And the discovery process of this, I think, was, I'm almost certain that it was ended because of this new threat, as it would have been called.
All right. All that being said, and this is a question for the both of you, with buildings coming down and thousands dying in New York and the Pentagon on September 11th, and now the bioterror worries and cyanide in Mexico, and my God, it's coming at us from all directions. And to some degree, we don't have a clue. I would think that this would be the ideal application for what that program was doing. Gentlemen?
Well, I said this. I was asked to write a sort of a paper after the World Trade Center came down, which, by the way, I watched from my roof here in New York. Terrible, terrible day. And I was going to have to say in this paper, which I decided not to produce, that we really needed telepathy at that point, right? To even get a handle on this, but we didn't have it anymore because but after the Soviet Union threat about this kind of research ceased, then there was no need at the government level to pursue it anymore. So, we could have used it, but we didn't have it at the time.
Paul, you saw the end of this coming, or at least you were in touch with the people who saw the end of this coming, right?
Mm-hmm, yep.
Do you concur with Ingo with regard to the telepathy aspect of it being an important part of the end of it all?
Of course, Ingo had a part of the picture I didn't have, and I had a part that he didn't have at the time. And I didn't know, well, I, of course, knew about that development because I was being taught how to do that, how to, get intentions and things such as that from people at the target location that you might be remote viewing. So I knew about the technology, and it worked quite well. We had some very interesting results.
Well, it began to work quite well.
Okay. Within the limits of how far it developed, it worked quite well.
Yeah.
But and of course that it didn't occur to me or my colleagues at the time that there would be any kind of a concern up the food chain about that. But we were busy with our work, and we were really wrapped up in this. Ingo, of course, had more of a focus on the outside politics of it than we did. But you think about it after the fact, what a powerful thing that is. Be able to get that kind of information.
Dangerous.
Yes.
Dangerous. It would be viewed as dangerous. I would think, and maybe I've seen too many movies, but gee whiz, our government is based on secrets, thrives on secrets, can't exist without secrets, and if they thought all of that was in jeopardy, particularly by 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 men, I wouldn't give you 2 cents for their lives. And did that occur to any of you?
Well, it didn't occur to us down in the trenches, but it clearly appeared to occur to a few other folks, like Ingo.
Well, it was really funny in one way, By the way, it's not just our government who exists on secrets. The whole world exists on secrets.
Absolutely.
And no matter at what level of activity you're at, there's got to be a secret, because that's the only way to try to get advantages over anything or anybody and things like that. So that's a big part of what kind of research should go on in these areas and what kind shouldn't. In beginning in 1821, René Walcollier in France published his first book on telepathy. And he went on up until, the 60s before he died, and he made a tremendous statement about not only about the existence of telepathy, but about its signal-to-noise ratio even. And this is a very, very important segment of work. Unfortunately, it resided in French for years, and still mostly does. But his work was, when it really came to the issue of can this be applied somehow, he was cut off at the pass, just like all other telepathy researchers have been.
But why? When we face a national threat of the magnitude we face right now,
yes,
bionuclear, whatever it's going to be,
right?
It's almost impossible to believe that our government would not utilize every single tool that it can, just as the police, when they finally get exasperated, tend to go to psychics.
In my opinion, they will not tolerate developmental telepathy. They'll risk everything. Well, that's a big, harsh statement, but that's certainly been my experience. I'm not a baby in this anymore,
I know.
The conference coming up that Paul's going to talk about is celebrating the 30th anniversary of remote viewing, 30 years of it. And for whatever reason, I was mostly thrown into the middle of it throughout that time and helped innovate approaches to making a clear signal channel versus a noisy signal channel. And you end up encountering information that's not tangible and beginning to deal in that. And although you might not recognize telepathy within those contexts, it still amounts to telepathy.
Well, those who were the gatherers of this information obviously recognized the areas into which you were beginning to move. Even if those who participated didn't recognize it, I guess once, if you're in a position to put all the pieces of the puzzle together, all the information bits that come to you separately, you realize that you've just walked into something that is potentially dangerous to you.
Well, the way, there's been in a historical context, which a lot of people have really gone into, mind reading has always been not really tolerated throughout history. So there's a big historical background to that, and you're right. Everybody runs this government. Everybody's whatever runs on secrecy, and you can be psychic or a trained remote viewer, and you can talk about buildings and rocks that have drugs hidden underneath it, and this and that and everything, and people would consider that useful in the way they operate.
Mm-hmm.
But mind reading means you're going to read not only the minds of the people at the target sites, but you can read minds, period. And, things come to a screeching halt at that point while they consider the implications, and the implications are too terrible to consider.
So that becomes more important than any potential national security problem.
Personal interests or organized interests, vested interests, are always going to be more important than anything.
Everybody has skeletons. Everybody has secrets.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It amounts to that.
So suddenly breaking up the official program and casting you all off on your own then allows them to sort of suddenly then you can be treated just as any other psychic might be, with no added weight given to anything you might say, and so they allow you to live in a sense because you just become part of the greater noise. Is that?
That's right. Well, yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. Reduce it back to noise, in other words. I mean, to heck with the channels and clearing them up and making them more healthy to convey information. That ends up in really some spectacular remote viewing as far as physicality is concerned. But if you don't want some research to proceed, without making any issue of it at all, you just let it reduce itself back to noise. You take away,
yes,
you take away the support of it, and then it gets back to natural psychism, which is full of egos and things like that.
Well, gentlemen, we're a nation pretty concerned right now about the other shoe coming down, biologically, from a nuclear point of view, soft targets, hard targets. We're getting all these warnings from the government. Do either one or both of you have any knowledge of what we might be facing?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking anybody who wants to answer.
I didn't hear Paul jump up here. I don't. Personally, I think it's a good idea to bring these contexts to public attention. Because the public in general hopes somebody's controlling things somewhere and taking care of things.
That's right.
And they don't want to be bothered with these things. But these are issues which we really do need to be educated in, right down to the grassroots level. But in my opinion, which doesn't mean anything really, these threats are probably not as big, are not going to turn out to be as big as the threat appears, because, if you release nuclear radiation or biobombs and all of that stuff, it's going to just go around the planet like mad, and everybody's going to suffer, including the propagators.
Well, that hasn't stopped those who blow themselves up in Israel.
No, there is such a thing as social conditioning. You can condition people to do that, but that's, as horrendous as it is, using kids as living bombs and things like that, it still is not a nuclear threat or a biological threat.
Have either one of you done specific remote viewing with regard to the danger we face now?
I have not.
I have not either.
Intentionally, or have you considered doing it and decided not to? And if so, for what reason?
Well, nobody's asked me to do it, and then I'm retired, Mr. Bell.
Yes, I know, Ingo.
I'm retired, and nobody's asked anybody to do anything like this that I know of with respect to those kind of issues and things like that. But then I'm out of the loops, and I'm getting old, and
I think what Ingo said, though, is important. Nobody asked him to do it. I mean, that's the same case with me. There's a few folks out there in the remote viewing community who said they have been asked to do things. It seems probably by individual FBI or CIA agents or whatever. The fact is that it really doesn't accomplish anything to do it on your own. You could be the best remote viewer in the world, produce accurate information, do a session on your own, but then trying to get it accepted into the system is very difficult.
It's
generally, they won't accept it unless it's their idea to task in the first place.
I see. Well, there's about to be a remote viewing conference. I think it's, June 14th through the 16th in Austin, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. We have a lot of listeners in Austin, and I want to tell everybody if they'd like to be part of it, we've got a phone number, which is toll-free, 866. Am I right? Is it toll-free?
That's right.
Yeah, toll-free. Okay, 866-374-4782. That's 866-374-4782. Or, of course, on the web at www.rvconference.org. We've got a link up on my website. So if you're in the Austin area or even down in that part of Texas, you're going to want to look into this. But, I mean, this is a place where a lot of you all get together, right?
Yep. And, of course, this year, we're very pleased that Ingo is going to be our main speaker. There's a lot of excitement about that. As you just heard, he's got a lot to say, a lot of things to say that people haven't heard before. So
obviously,
so we're real excited about that. In fact, we have a lot of people from the early days of remote viewing that haven't spoken in public very extensively at all that are going to be here. We even have Cleve Baxter, who is really the kind of, I guess you could say, Yenta that got Ingo together with Hal Puthoff.
Yeah, Cleve Baxter. That's his lab that I started in doing experiments in 1970 when he was here in New York.
In those early experiments, Ingo, what were you able to demonstrate that got everybody so hot?
Cleve Baxter was, he's a lie detector. He had a lie detection school. He's one of America's leading lie detecting experts. But, you do your job and you get bored with it, so you do something else to enjoy it. So he was hooking plants up to his lie detectors, and he found that plants would respond to negative thoughts. If a human came in and he would say, okay, this plant's hooked up. Now light a match and think that you're going to burn the plant. And his lie detector would start showing activity in the plant, So there was a guy in lie detecting who was experimenting with human-to-plant telepathy at that period. And the scientific community just ridiculed him like mad because they said plants don't have nervous systems that can send signals. And he was actually vindicated in 1992 when people discovered that at least tomato plants could send danger warnings to not only to their own plant systems but to neighboring plant systems too if a caterpillar got on them and started eating. And Cleve, we did that at Cleve's place for a while, and then he said that I think I could influence a solid object and change its electric potential shift. And so he put some oxygen in a tube. That oxygen in a tube is compressed oxygen, and if it gets slightly warmer or colder, then its electric potential changes.
Yes. I've been watching very closely the work going on at Princeton University, and I've indulged some probably pretty dangerous experiments myself with the audience. But what occurred with Princeton was rather interesting. They had these computers, scattered around the world, which they called eggs. And these eggs would report back to the master computer at Princeton, and they would watch world events. And they would take the reports from these random number generators, these computers placed at different physical locales around the world. And, oh my God, if you look at the graph, for example, on September 11th, you'll find that 4 hours prior to the event, the graph began to go off the chart. The graph went off the chart when the event occurred and then trailed off for the next several hours after that. Now, that in itself, of course, is pretty interesting stuff. These random number generators began to get somewhat non-random, more and more non-random. The more non-random they'd become, the higher the graph would go. Incredible experiment, and it turns out they've been doing this for some time. What do you think? What would your best guess, either one of you, be? What is that graph measuring?
Well, I'll let Ingo talk first because I'm kind of curious to know what he has to
say. I'm not completely up to snuff on that experiment. I do know that it occurred. But, it actually, at least part of the basis for this kind of effect has to come from the concept that everything is interconnected.
Yes, sir.
And that even within the electromagnetic spectrum or other kind of spectrums, energy spectrums that haven't been discovered since such as group mind phenomena, that if everything's interconnected, then everything shows divergence from a random path when things are getting ready to happen. I mean, if you're interconnected, then, for instance, even in remote viewing, that you can train awareness and attention to become more specifically aware of signals that have to do with a distant sight. That's the type of interconnection that we're experiencing all the time at a very subconscious level. They are very weak signals. But there's enough of these weak signals that take place that it affects even machines like delicate computers and things like that.
Yes.
And
wouldn't these results and the fact this has been going on for some time now tend to underscore what you all do as telepaths, remote viewers? Wouldn't it underscore?
Absolutely.
It seems to me like it's all coming from the same totality of a non-locality, which
That's
is
right.
Right?
That's right.
So
these are called non-locality experiments, and what's his name? I can't think of his name at this late date. I'm getting old, you know.
Dean Radin, is that who you're thinking of?
Huh?
Dean Radin, is that who you're thinking of?
No, I'm talking about, well, anyhow, I'll find his book here, and I'll give you the name in a second. But, yeah, Mr. Bell, you have the completely right idea. And if everything's connected, then you find that on significant surges within everything that's interconnected, that, well, it's like in Star Wars. There's the Force out there, and there can be ripples in the Force, right?
Yes. Oh, yes, yes.
And ripples in the Force will affect even highly designed sensitive equipment.
Well, yes, exactly. But here's one thing suggested from this. Since the spikes began to go off the chart 4 hours prior to the event.
Oh, yes.
Is the nature now? Remote viewing, as I understand it, is not sensitive to time, present, future, past. It's all mixed together. Yes.
No, it is sensitive to time. We found in our experiments at SRI really quite early on. I'll tell you a cute little story.
All right.
That might, Hella Hammond was one of the natural psychics that worked at SRI for a long time. She was really a wonderful person, you know. And she was taking part in what we call the outbound experimenter type of thing, where some people were going to go to an undisclosed place, and when they got there, she was supposed to tell them things about where they were at, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one day, Pudolph came to my office and said, Hella's really bored with these experiments, and she says she already knows what the target's going to be.
Oh, really?
And what should they do? And I says, well, I mean, if Hella says it, do it, you know. So they did this experiment with her. Then they got in their car, and then they drove 2 miles away. And then they opened the envelope to tell them where they were supposed to go. And when they went there, it was the place Hella had described.
So she knew the target ahead of time.
Well, she didn't know it, but she said she had an appointment that she wanted to go to. You know, she was a good photographer, and she was giving a show at Stanford and things. So she said, I'll just do it now, and then you can do your experiment. And so we found that time can be specific, but she did it just like these machines did it. They started reacting a little while before things went on. So we found that you could front time an experiment. I mean, you could say, okay, here is the experiment. What we're interested in is what happened there in 1942, or what's going to happen there in the next 2 hours. And so we found out that the time did play some kind of a function in going into the past a little bit or going into the future a little bit. And that was because of Hella Hammond, who had a big ego, by the way, and could be just as stubborn as I was. So, no, these things are all the universe is interconnected, and, you know, people with great standing have been saying this for quite a while in the official sciences, and so it should not be too surprising that somebody could figure out a way to measure this.
Well, here's a leap for you. Do either one of you gentlemen think it would be possible to inject a concept into the greater non-locality, into the mass consciousness, to actually inject an idea or a concept into the mass consciousness?
In the 60s, when I was working at the UN, you know, I did a lot of reading. I was always interested in these things, and the first thing that I really got interested in reading about was the power of prayer. And it is the goal of the power of prayer to interject something just like you've described. That's the big goal of it.
Yes, but does the prayer have to have God as a conduit to be effective?
That I don't think anybody knows, but certainly...
And most people are afraid to even ask.
Well, I mean... that's an important issue.
A loaded question.
And a loaded question, but you can get around the edges of this anyway by saying, the power of prayer is to heal, to interject something into a declining situation that reverses the vector and brings it back to health, and various things like that. And that could only happen if, first of all, if interconnectivity did exist, and that you could interject something into the interconnectedness of all things.
Well, that's exactly what I'm asking. Now, think of it on a gigantic scale. The situation in the Middle East, for example, deteriorating, bad. Could somebody inject in the mass consciousness, if done correctly, some sort of concept that would have a chance of reversing what otherwise seems to be inevitable?
Well, this is very hypothetical, what I would like to respond, and of course there are people who know more about the power of prayer than I do. But, to reverse a situation like that, you have to match the mass in the declining situation with a positive aspect. So that's a big deteriorating situation there, so you have to have a lot of prayer. You have to. In other words, the energy has to be equal to the other energy in order to change it.
Gotcha. So but then by extension, it's easy to say that the power of many, many minds concentrating on one event or one outcome would be much greater than the power of one mind?
Oh, yes. That's group prayer. The power of group prayer. There's a whole epic of this interest which took place in the 60s, which has more or less now been forgotten in many ways. But, holding hands across the United States and, it falls into this category.
Sure it does. Paul, you agree with all this?
Yeah, well, of course, anytime you try and change society and succeed in doing it, it involves affecting thought in the future. Even when you use conventional means, you're doing that. Obviously you can't change something that's already happened, so you're trying to change thought in the future. If you write a book to persuade people to do something, that's what you're doing in effect. So it seemed that if there's this I want to say non-physical, but how do we know, non-physical means of affecting things, it would also have to project into the future, at least a short, a certain direction. You had mentioned the Pear Lab at Princeton.
Yes.
And Ingo mentioned Hella Hamid and her precognitive remote viewing, I should call it that. Of course, that's what the Pear Lab folks used. I mean, they did remote viewing experiments, but they were all precognitive. They all described the target that was going to be visited in the future. They described it in the past. That was their way of having a very clean protocol. And all this reflects, of course, the consciousness thing with the 9/11 event that you also talked about. Reflects some research that Dean Radin has done on presentiment, where people seem to have a physiological reaction to disturbing pictures that they're about to see, that they haven't yet seen, that they don't have with non-disturbing pictures. So there is something going on here, at least with the immediate future, whether I think the fact that the spike started 4 hours before the trade towers are hit suggests that the closer you are to the future, that future event, the more likely you are to get some kind of impact from it.
You mentioned Dean Radin. Very interesting, because I had Dean on the program, and the reason I had him on is because after I was presented with the information on the and saw the graphs on the 9/11 event, I just went, oh my God. And I decided to try an experiment myself, and we had Dean Radin watching some graphs, sort of unofficially, mind you, and we did a big mind experiment here on the air in which I told people to actually concentrate on driving these computers into a non-random state. And by God, when Dean got the graphs back, they were driven again right off the chart. At that point, I've done these experiments so many times that I began to get a little scared. I began to get a little very cautious, and I still feel all of that, a little scared and a little cautious because I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, and if you think extend something Ingo said about having to overcome negative energy, if you can positively affect the future by enough linked minds trying to think the same good thoughts, so to speak.
Yes.
You can do the same thing with negative thoughts.
Well, that was going to be my next question. It's just a force. I think Ingo compared it to the force. And the force could be wielded in any way, could it not?
It would seem that way to me.
Do you agree, Ingo? Can that force be used in a negative way?
Well, you can certainly condition people to think in negative thoughts.
Yes.
And, this whole situation, I mean, we're so inundated with negativity that if people could get a good thought going, more power to them. By the way, the author that I was a little confused about a little while ago was Rupert Sheldrake.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Who knows a great deal about interconnectedness. And I'm sorry I was not quite up to stuff on that.
Well, that's quite all right. The concept we were discussing was more important. That was, is this interconnectivity the same realm that you roam with the discipline of remote viewing, perhaps as what's being measured at Princeton, off into the same realm?
Well, I'd approach this from a different aspect. If you don't believe things are interconnected, then you're going to have a tough road to follow. If you know that things are interconnected, even though you can't explain it and you don't know what you're doing and things like that, then, there are many uplifting books that have been published in the past about this, and if you know things are interconnected, then you to get the best future results, you think in positive terms. The Power of Positive Thinking, which was published many, many years ago and became a best-selling book, points this out in the context that he could point it out back then. And this is a big issue. Nobody predicted, well, I don't know if anybody predicted the World Trade Center or not, but I know a lady who did artwork for Omni magazine in 1992. It was published in Omni magazine, and she pictured the World Trade Center towers going to heaven. And that, to me, is a presentment of that kind of thing. So I believe that people did sense something was going to happen, but probably not without the clarity that was needed to do anything about it.
Art, I have a question here for Ingo, if I can ask it.
Fire away.
What we're talking about, we talked about the power behind the possibility of reading people's minds. And there's a certain power here. We have the possibility to change the future, potentially, by linking our minds together and working towards something good or something bad. Ingo's published a couple of books on power, and I'm wondering if he's considered either of these in those books, or maybe he could tell us something about that.
My books?
Yeah.
Ah.
Do you cover this at all in your books, or what do you cover?
Well, not exactly from this point of view. The first volume, Power One, shows the sociological ramifications of power structures and the need to create powerless classes of people that will work within the power structures. So a lot never gets researched about human potentials overall. And my second volume, which is just sort of available now, considers empowerment at the individual level. But, everything's about power and status, I guess. And I've just organized information about power structures is one of my favorite topics for years.
I kind of wonder, gentlemen, with what I just went through with this stinking fever for 2 weeks, I really did. I had these flashes of what you could certainly attribute to just a high fever, and I'm sure everybody will, which is just spiffy. But I'm telling you, I had flashes of something else, some other entirely different reality. And as we consider the Matrix and the whole concept of the Matrix and the possibility of other dimensions and new universes being created with change. Anybody have any points of view on any of that they want to talk about?
Well,
I'll let Paul do that one.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I'll cover a little bit, but some of it belongs to Ingo. One point of interest, I've heard rumors, I don't know how true these are, but the name for the movie, The Matrix, the rumor is that they actually got that title from some of Ingo Swann's and Hal Puthoff's theories about remote viewing. Because in Ingo's CRV, there is the notion of a matrix that is, the repository of everything, all facts and all information about the universe, which comes from David Bohm, and Ingo can talk a little bit about that perhaps. But this idea, Kaku's idea about creating parallel universes, that's an old one in philosophy. A lot of people have talked about that. Whether or not it's true, of course, that's hard to tell. But I think that there certainly are other underlying realities, or maybe it's all sub-elements of a bigger reality than we're consciousness of. And you could easily have picked up on something like that, it seems to me. So anyway, with that, I'll turn it over to Ingo and see what he can do with it.
The Matrix, Ingo.
The Matrix. How are we defining Matrix?
As, I guess, all that we perceive. All that we see around us. That was the concept of the Matrix. In the movie, there was, of course, science fiction, but it was, a projected thing that the world looked a certain way when actually the world had been utterly destroyed ecologically and so forth and so on. And it was a wasteland, but to everybody else it looked clean and nice, and everybody was living their everyday life, and it was all being done in their minds. It was some matrix of a presentation of a reality.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you know that our human sensing systems, that's all of them, that's just not the 5 physical ones, but all of our sensing systems that are now known to exist through the science of studying receptors, which is, I'm going to talk about this down in Austin, by the way. All our sensing systems are sending about 10 million information bits to our brain every second. But only 40 of these get into the cortex, where consciousness is formed. And we form our consciousness about what is perceivable within the cortex, and we're only doing 40 bits per second out of all these 10 million that are coming into us. There's a book that came out in Europe a little while ago and finally got to the United States it has a kind of a strange title. It's called The User Illusion by a guy named Tor Norritanders. And in this book, he is reporting up to date on everything that's known about how consciousness is formed. If information doesn't get into our cortex, we will not perceive it.
So in other words, then, Ingo, does that mean that we only perceive a very tiny, by percentage, a tiny bit of what we might be able to perceive?
That's right. That's
if we were totally connected, yes?
Yes, but the surprising aspect of this is this was known since the 1950s, by the way. Wow. So if you can get information bits into your cortex, which is, this is the outer part of the brain which wraps around the back of your head and across the top of the head, and it's just a layer of neurons and synapses and things like that. But if you took it out and unfolded it all together, it would be about 21 square feet. Anyhow, this is where our perceptions are made, and the perceptions are made based upon the information bits, very few information bits that gets through to the cortex. When you have an unusual situation, such as your high fever and things like that, probably your perceptual connection to your physical universe declined just a bit.
It sure did.
Faded away. Mm-hmm. And this allowed, in these 40 bits to come through, information based upon other potentials that you and everyone else has. And so you undergo these altered states of consciousness, as they're called. But this book, The User Illusion, I believe that all remote viewers should keep up to date on conventional research, which is actually increasingly substantiating the reality that things like remote viewing and sensing other realities just goes on in us all the time, except that our cortex and our reality boxes filter out everything that doesn't fit with our reality boxes unless there's some great change of some kind, and then you begin to experience these other things. And since you don't have any information about that these are natural processes, you get apprehensive and scared and frightened, I guess, or something like that. But the basis for consciousness is now really very thoroughly understood, and the basis for the millions of different kinds of receptors that we have is increasingly understood. And it just includes everything that we've been talking about tonight, including remote viewing.
Gentlemen, is there any indication that consciousness continues following physical death?
Boy, you like to segue from one imposing situation to another one, don't you?
That's my business, yes. It really is. It's the ultimate question, isn't it? With regard to consciousness, whether it ends like...
Anybody who's had a clinical death experience with a flat brainwave who comes out of it can talk about that really good. Yes, it does exist. But it's, in English, we're very limited in our nomenclature, so we have to refer to everything like this as consciousness. But there's different kinds of it based on different kinds of information and so forth and so on. And believe me, these biological bodies could not operate unless there was a super type of consciousness that was doing the operational thing from the subconscious level. And having undergone a clinical death experience in 1972, I can say, yes, there's consciousness after death.
And what did you experience?
Oh, I was coming down with the flu. I was staying with the put-offs down in California. And we had two, what we used to call East Coast scientists coming to test me further the next day. And I was coming down with the flu, so I took a penicillin pill hoping to get rid of it. And in about 4 minutes, I underwent anaphylactic shock and died, and was dead for 21 minutes.
21 minutes.
And floating up on the ceiling of the room and going out and being on the roof and coming back. So I said, I'm not ready to die yet. So, and was screaming in Put-Off's head to what to do and try and things like that and everything. And eventually he did it, and which was turn me over and stick his finger down my throat.
You're telling me you had not only the classic experience of floating on the ceiling or even out of the building, but
right.
But you were screaming telepathically to help Put-Off.
Well, I was trying.
Well, and apparently you succeeded.
Well, I don't know. He just was. They'd called the ambulance, of course, and so when he stuck his finger down my throat, it caused an autonomic response in my body, choking, in which I got a breath of air, and then they dragged me to the toilet because I started throwing up and everything. Dying is a messy experience. I can tell you that, and that's how they found me when the ambulance guys got there, and
wow.
dragged me off to the Stanford University Hospital where I was doing EEGs for the next 4 hours to see if I had any brain damage or anything like that. So I was out there. I did not see the white light, and I did not see anybody waiting for me. So it was not really a typical type of thing. But
and yet you do recall being above your body.
Oh, yeah.
Seeing your body.
Yeah.
Can you remember the state you were in? Do you have any...
Yes, it was practically nothing. A piece of nothing that had 360-degree vision in all directions. A little point of something.
So you were you were seeing everything at once.
Yep.
Would be a way to put it, wouldn't it?
Yep. And furthermore, I more or less accepted it as my real natural state in that condition. I know it sounds too awful to believe.
No, it doesn't.
Actually happened, you know.
That was your reality. In other words, to you, that was as real as the state you're in right now on the phone.
Yeah. No, it was more lucid. It was more liquid. You know, it was sort of a liquid state. You know, we don't have terms for this. Sanskrit language has terms for these things, but English doesn't.
Well, in some of these telepathic channels that you had opened during this program, or that you've opened during your life, have you encountered? That's another good old loaded question. But have you encountered apparent consciousness disembodied from any physicality?
You mean ghosts? For example?
Let's use any name you want. You can call them ghosts. You can call them aliens. You can call them, I suppose, devils or angels, or any manner of consciousness that you were aware was not attached to a physical body.
You mean a disembodied consciousness?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I have, but there's been talked about through history so many times by so many people that it's really surprising that it's just not accepted as that thing. Here we are, a species, and we experience these things all the time. Thousands, millions of people experience these kind of things, and we have this as a species attribute, a very wonderful one. And yet we live in these little tiny social enclaves that are so restricted on what they accept as reality that we have to edit all those things out in order to fit in. And it doesn't matter if I have personally, it doesn't matter if individuals personally experience these things, because it matters more that the species experiences these things. All cultures have traditions along these lines, going back into antiquity. And here we sit in our modern age and say, well, no, we're not going to permit that. We're not going to permit telepathy either. We're going to devalue the power of prayer in order to, what it more or less amounts to is support our local software programming social structures, And somebody said something cute to me the other day. She said, all that we are, our minds and our bodies and everything, are just life support systems for our software programs, our mental software programs, which people are willing to die for. And, so you're seeing I'm having an attitude here that doesn't quite fit with local reality boxes, as I call them. Mm-hmm. And I can get very verbose at times. But this is what you're talking about, in a way that we have an ongoing conflict between our sociologically programmed reality boxes and what our species is actually capable of. And we're a wonderful species. We have this neocortex things that can do things that no other animals can do. And that's contact the future and contact the past. And
how many more remote viewing conferences do you think have to come and go before mainstream science is going to embrace what you're saying?
Mainstream science, I'm going to talk about this in my lecture, my 2 lectures. Mainstream science is producing new formats of reality that already incorporate things like remote viewing and a number of other things. We now have millions of receptors. In I think in 97 or 98, there came a report out of Europe that an experiment had been done over there. And it's a really funny one if you want me to tell you about it.
Go right ahead.
But they got together a bunch of guys of various social standing and everything. They made them wear a T-shirt for a couple of weeks. And then they got together a group of women who were in the ovulating period of their menstrual cycle and things. Mm-hmm. And asked them to sniff these T-shirts.
Yeah.
And so they all did this, and then they had one question. Can you tell me what this question is most likely to have been?
Not a chance.
Not a chance. They asked them, sniff these T-shirts and tell us which one you think would be the best provider. And they did it.
Hold on. I've got I get these email messages, these fast blast things by computer as we're doing the program. Teresa in Renton, I guess, Washington, says, I'm a nurse, and I've had patients say, I'm going to die, and absolutely then proceed to code and die. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Do people know frequently when they're going to die? I mean, she's saying they literally say, I'm going to die now, and they die.
I think they probably do, although I'm not sure it's always the knowledge. It may be a decision. Some people just decide that they're going to die at that point.
A decision.
There was a little story that came out of the media a little while ago. I saw it somewhere, probably in the New York Post. There was this old guy who said he would know when he's going to die, and he would take care of everything. So one day he drove down to the mortuary, and his car parked it and died in front of the mortuary, and he had all the instructions about what to do with his body. So there you are.
Just to clean it up before the break, we were discussing these ovulating women.
Yes. Now listen,
who were sniffing the T-shirts, right?
If ovulating women can pick good providers by sniffing T-shirts,
did they?
Then anything is possible. So what it means technically is that everybody has all these different kinds of receptors in their nose. They don't just smell smells, they smell emotions, they smell this and everything, and that's known in science now.
I was joking, the smell of success.
Well, it's the same thing. I mean, you can smell success, too. People have been smelling success I don't know how long. But we have receptors in the nose, which we think just smells garlic and roses and things, but they can smell other things, too. So when these ladies are ovulating, these very rare receptors become active, and they can pick a good provider.
And they did that?
And they did that, yes.
Ah.
And it's reported. I think it was reported in Science Magazine. My friend Tom Bergen downloaded all of that for me from the Internet, so it's probably under smell if anybody wants to look it up or anything.
Well, isn't there some old expression about smelling fear?
Oh, yes. In the past, everybody thought that was psychic, but now we know that there are receptors in the nose that smell all these things. And so it's not psychic anymore. It's just an undiscovered part of our information receptor systems that nobody really had nailed down in science, but they've nailed them down now.
Well, is there a discipline, either one of you, for connecting more of these synaptic lines to the cortex? Is there some way you can train yourself to do that, or are there just those natural born like you, Ingo?
Well, I've never smelled success myself. If I had, I'd have probably not done remote viewing at all. Look, you can train anything. We have one constant factor that's been with our species since as long as we know it, and that we have a mind and we have a brain, but we also have awareness and attention. And anything that gets into the cortex has to be a strong enough signal to get through all of the filters and things that these signals have to get through. And if it gets through those, then it becomes a blip at the base of consciousness. Consciousness in the cortex. The cortex then builds a simulation of what it thinks this blip means. After the simulation is built, then we become aware of it, and then we can see it or decode it or recognize it for what it's worth. And it's pretty sure that this is how consciousness is formed. It's formed after the fact of all of these other processes.
Although more times than not, that little blip is rejected entirely or not digested in any meaningful way, correct?
10 million of them are rejected every second. So now you can you can certainly train awareness, and you can train attention, and you can therefore training perception. And this kind of training goes on in every field, every human activity. So Dr. Puthoff's genius at the project, by the way, the remote viewing development project at SRI came about because of Dr. Harold Puthoff, who was the first to propose it to his Washington people and things like that, and it got going, and it was under his guidance and genius that the work was converted to information theory rather than parapsychology and things like that. So I believe him to be the SRI father of remote viewing, because without him, I would have been nothing myself. At any rate, if you can train attention. Can you not train attention? You can train attention.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, it's done in music, it's done in sports, it's done in horse racing, it's done in Wall Street and everything. So everything depends upon those signals that get through to the cortex that you can become attentive to. And you can really do anything you want with this, including remote viewing training and smelling T-shirts and looking at the stars, and all of this is coming from the conventional sciences now. The conventional sciences are catching up with all of this.
Well, we know that, for example, some autistic children, to all the world, barely functional in the society we understand, are capable of strange,
wonderful things,
bizarre and wonderful things, mathematical calculations that it would take the very best computer we have to figure out, and so you must imagine there's some connections made there that aren't made for us, eh?
Well,
you have to think from the species level downwards, not from the individual level upwards. Nothing can happen to us as an individual unless it's already encoded, its potentials are already encoded into our species profile. And so people who are not operating on their sociological software programming like autistic people are probably getting information bits about these other things right along. We could do that too, hypothetically anyway.
In fact, autism actually has a sort of indirect remote viewing connection here.
Sure.
Having been one that's gone through Ingo's training program, and I can attest to how effective it was, there's an interesting piece of scientific writing about autism that suggested that maybe the reason you have these savants who are autistic is that they aren't distracted by all the conscious processes that get in, that are going on in the normal, average, everyday person. And in fact, Ingo's training methodology, the objective of that is to help us to get beyond the normal, everyday conscious goings on, what is often termed as mental noise, in order to allow the remote viewing to work. So it may well be that these autistic folks are able to function at such a high level in those things because they aren't distracted by the things that normal people are distracted by.
All right, now let's take a real species leap here for a moment. There have been some very interesting experiments, which, by the way, were documented on national television, regarding dogs. Now, here we go down the chain instead of up, and a pretty big jump down the chain, I would say, or most people, I think, would say, perhaps not in some respects, but, I mean, dogs documented to be understanding of their owner on the way home at a time the owner should not be on the way home, obviously reacting to the fact that the owner is on the way home without having any knowledge of the fact that the owner is coming home at this strange, unusual time again and again and again and again. The dog knew the owner was coming home. Mm-hmm. What's that all about?
That's where dogs are telepathic. Come on.
In fact,
dogs are telepathic. I mean,
Ingo had mentioned Rupert Sheldrake, and in fact, this particular instance got notoriety from Rupert Sheldrake in a book he's written about animals that tend to know things that they really oughtn't to know, at least according to our current models. the dog, would know when the owner was coming, even though it was out of, as you described, out of sync with the normal schedule and all that. And this is an interesting thing in terms of your 9/11 chart showing conscious focusing on this event that's about to happen. And it ties in this way. There are, of course, lots of stories and accounts of animals that seem to know when earthquakes are coming and things like that.
Oh, yes.
There's attempted a standard physical explanation. Oh, they just sent some kind of, thing that's released before the earthquake happens, or some kind of subtle sensory things. But
actually, I don't know whether you know or not, a man named Jim Birkeland that I interview was the only official county geologist for a county in California, and predicted the Loma Prieta earthquake, the World Series earthquake, rather, right on the noggin. And you know how he predicts earthquakes? He watches the newspapers for the number of lost cats and dogs.
Mm-hmm. They're leaving town.
Yeah, they're leaving town. That's right. And the numbers go up just like the Princeton charts. They just go off the chart before an earthquake.
There's some speculation that these mental abilities that, of course, our society tends to discount, but that Ingo and I know exist, that these were, there's some speculation that they were evolved into the various species. That it was adaptive, that the animals and in humans should have some capacity to, predict things like where food might be found and when a threat might occur, in a way that wasn't tied just to the normal physical senses. But that we in our world today have kind of lost that or forgotten that we had that ability, and that's only through things like remote viewing that we try and reawaken them. So,
well, all right, then wouldn't it be fair to say that psychically, man has probably, in the modern era, devolved from a psychic point of view, as opposed to evolving?
I don't think devolved is the right word, and that's been proposed. People have said, well, we've devolved and we're not as good as we used to be. But the way natural selection works, you only devolve if a particular characteristic is negative. If it's neutral, if you're not using it, it may go away if you lose some other kind of genetic characteristic. But if it isn't a negative to your survival, it doesn't go anywhere. It just may be sublimated or suppressed in some respect to that degree. So I don't think we've actually devolved. I think we just need to reawaken what's there. We've just been sleeping for so long.
Yeah, I agree. Our species genome carries all these things. You can imagine this great board of switches. Our genome has millions of them, and all but 10% of them are switched off.
Yes.
In order to make us fit into this very limited social context that we're forced to live within. And so switch them back on again, that's all. Anything can be trained. Anything that can be nurtured, nurturing is a form of training. You can nurture these things.
All right, I wonder how the two of you feel about... I interviewed a professor in Great Britain, I don't know, it was a month ago maybe, who's just had a chip implanted in his arm. Now,
I heard, yeah.
Yeah, very interesting case. Now, he's probably the first real cyborg. But he imagines a world in which our thoughts can be integrated with the linear computing power, literally integrated with a computer. Mm-hmm. Anybody see any danger in that approach, man meets machine?
There's nothing that's naturally dangerous along these lines. The only thing that makes them dangerous is social attitudes about them. And I can get very uptight about all that. No, I think that we should progress. We should explore all these things, but our brains, our natural biological inheritance, our biomind inheritance has a lot of switches and chips already in them. Mm-hmm. We have chips. If you want to call a receptor a chip, it's a chip. It's still a receptor, and it's going to send information to your brain. Whether it gets processed through into the cortex consciousness or not is an entirely different matter. But that's because most societies don't nurture anything hardly at all except what fits into their local power structures.
All right, that's one answer about machines. Now, what about genetics? We've unraveled the human genome. The next logical...
Not completely yet.
No, well, perhaps not completely, but close. And the next logical step is the beginning of the manipulation of the human genome.
Well, there's a category of genome factors. I think geneticists... Anybody can correct me on this because I'm correctable, you know. They've found a lot of genes that they don't know the function of.
Right.
Called junk DNA.
So maybe.
It's not that the genome has been decoded. They may be able to count the number of genes now, but a lot of them, they don't know what they're doing, what they're there for. So there's things yet to be discovered when you say the genome is mapped. So we have all these potentials, all these things that you've brought up tonight, and so forth and so on. And everybody should try everything in order to fulfill and identify these potentials, I think.
So you're not, neither one of you really has any great cautions about plunging ahead, either with the human-machine connection or perhaps with modification of...
Well, we have two choices, Mr. Bell, as I see it now in my old age. We can retreat to the past and its boundaries, or we can plunge along into the future where we don't know what we're doing, but we might find out a few things that will better our life on Earth.
I think there's a third choice.
Oh, good.
And that one is to go carefully into the future and try and plan as well as we can what we're doing. I think it's probably not quite correct to say that neither of us have any cautions about either man-machine interfaces such as you described or genetic developments. I think that anybody who thinks about it feels that there ought to be some caution. That doesn't mean that we oughtn't to do it. It just means that we ought to perhaps be a little more careful with how we do it than we have with other dangerous technology that we've explored in the past.
Well, there's a fourth option then, too, Paul.
Okay.
It's an old adage. It goes back some time that states very clearly that nothing risked, nothing gained.
By the way, Kreskin, this fellow Kreskin, has made this interesting prediction that there will be a sighting in the Nevada desert witnessed by hundreds or thousands of people of the biggest UFO sighting ever in history or something. I believe it's in July. In fact, I'm going to have Kreskin on talk about this, but he's so sure of what he's saying that he's putting up $50,000 if it doesn't happen.
Huh.
Either one of you hear about that?
That's the first I've heard of it.
He was just here at a birthday party for Alex Image in March, by the way. Dr. Image, it was his 99th birthday, and he looked great. And Kreskin came as one of his guests. I can't bend forks either.
Have you encountered people who can?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, same here.
You've both seen the mind affect physical material.
Well, I've seen a kid that didn't have the strength to bend anything, hardly. Fork just melted. So,
go ahead.
But anyhow, it's an embarrassment that I, of all people, can't bend a fork.
Well, we have different connections, apparently. Now... that one is particularly interesting because anybody who could melt a fork could probably cause a burst artery or God knows what else in a human being. Wouldn't you think?
I don't think necessarily. I mean, you're talking about different materials, and who knows how mental influence may affect different materials. We don't know the answer to that. It's possible, but I don't know that we know for sure.
I know of a psychic in the early 70s who said he could hold a rat that had cancer in his hands and he would heal it. So when the rat got in his hands, it promptly died. So anything is possible. Still, I don't particularly back away from the negative issues of all this, and say they're just hypothetical. Maybe they go on all the time.
And obviously humor doesn't dilapidate with age, does it? All right, listen, I'm going to take a couple calls. I've promised, and so I need to. First-time caller line, you're on the air with Ingo Swann and Paul Smith. Hi.
Hi, how's it going? Hi, Ingo.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, some of us are blessed and some are not so blessed. It's I have that weird thing that runs in the family where you can actually, you see little weird things happening here and there. And you start getting, after a while, you start not wanting to tell anybody about it because you actually start thinking you're making these things happen. Have you had that feeling?
Oh, actually, there's a really, really good question. Hold on here while I get rid of this apparent echo I have. Let's see if I can get rid of it. There we go. Trying to get 1 million people on the air at once here is tough. I wonder how many people are either blessed or, depending on your point of view, cursed with the kind of abilities that man is talking about and just never say a doggone thing to anybody, or else maybe they do once or twice and then decide telling people's not such a good idea.
Well, that's a given. I mean, if these things are forbidden in our social orders, then if you start talking about them, you're forcing yourself outside of the social order. And everybody wants to be approved by their peers, more or less. And so they're just things you don't talk about. Other than just these kind of phenomena, there's a lot of things you don't talk about. You don't talk about anything that's not approved amongst your peer grouping. And the peer grouping has been software programmed by the social orders around them.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that there are 10 million information bits we could be talking about, but we only talk about 40 of them because those are the ones that are approved. So it's been a problem. I think that's been a problem for a long time, centuries.
All right. Wildcard line, you're on the air with Ingo Swann and Paul Smith. Hi.
Hello, am I on air?
You are on the air. Where are you, sir?
Oh, hi, Art. Okay, I wanted to share something with you and Dr. Smith and Swann about something that I don't know if it's safe to try at home, but it's very easy to try at home to confirm some of the things that they're saying. And it's been my experience that I've been watching yellow jackets and hornets and bees and such creatures for many years, since I was 8 years old, and even made a profession out of it. So I am a scientist. And I noticed in particular the tree hornet, which is Dolica vespula arenaria. It's the one that builds a nest like a football in a tree, but not the white-faced hornets, the ones that look like yellow jackets. And I found that when observing them, if you're very nice to them and you feed them some syrup on a piece of typing paper, they'll come and eat it and let you watch them. But if I go to any thoughts like imagining what it would be like if a raccoon got into their nest and started preying on them, or imagined if I could pick up some of their dead under the nest, being a vegetarian, I was feeding my pet ants on only dead insects that I found and wouldn't kill any to feed them. And I thought that the hornets wouldn't mind parting with some of their dead. But the moment I thought of acquiring their dead to feed it to the ants or a raccoon preying on them, they immediately came out angry and trying to sting me. But I was able to stop their attack by thinking about feeding them more syrup and how this would help them cool their nest because they'd have more energy to collect water from the streamlet instead of nectar if I gave them more syrup in it.
Okay. Okay, gentlemen.
I love it.
You love it,
Great.
you love it, you love it, huh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, consciousness is interconnected.
Clive
Cussler.
I guess that's
Clive Baxter showed that in plants anyway. And I grew up in the Rockies and then later on in Utah where we had lots of hornets and yellow jackets. And you just had to think that you weren't going to bother them and they didn't get excited. But if you came with a broomstick to knock their nest down, you had trouble coming your way. So, yeah, this is really real to me. And, yeah, sure.
Now, I had a lady. I had a lady who claimed that she made deals with insects that they would drive her nuts, and that she would make deals with them. She would project thoughts to them that if they would basically leave her alone, mosquitoes and such, that she would not kill them. She came to some sort of agreement and claimed that it actually worked, that somehow there was some sort of understanding imparted, and by God, they left her alone. You believe that?
Yes, I think there's a couple of traditions in Africa about that kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we have only this one word, consciousness, but our intentions can send out ripples in the force, right?
Yes.
And if insects find that we don't have good intentions towards them, then they get excited and go into the warrior status right away. But if our intentions are interpreted as non-threatening, then they don't bother us.
May I ask you both this? We now think, or we've thought for some time, that the most powerful force on on Earth was nuclear energy, the bomb. Now, is it possible that once understood and developed, if not fully developed, significantly, that the power of mass consciousness, directed thought, or prayer, substitute whatever word you want, could become the most powerful, or is now, or would be the most powerful force on Earth?
I told Paul I'd leave him the difficult questions to answer, so there you go, Paul.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. Well, I think it could be. It's interesting. I mean, we can use the analogy of laser light, where, light uncaptured, radiating out in all directions in all spectrums, white light, is very useful. I mean, we read with it, but it isn't extremely powerful. And yet, if you take that light and make it all the same frequency and arrange it such that it continues to increase and amplify its power in like a ruby rod or something, you end up with an extremely useful and precise instrument. If we could learn to do the same thing with consciousness, and obviously it'd have to be mass consciousness, because it's like one little photon. One individual consciousness is like one little photon in the universe. It doesn't amount to a lot, but when you put a whole bunch of photons together, then it really does. So I think the answer is, ultimately you could have something more powerful than nuclear energy with consciousness, if we could just learn how to do it, how to use it.
Laser light is coherent light. It's light that's shifted from a random sort of thing into a coherency that becomes directed.
Sure.
And when you talk about the power of prayer and superconsciousness and things can change the future, it's true, but it has to, some of it has to become coherent. And this begins at the individual level. You have to agree to be coherent with other people in terms of this, and if you can't agree with that, then it doesn't become coherent. And of course, we're socially engineered to think in terms of non-coherency, because it's to the advantage of the few to encourage that view. So our worldwide social enclaves are, you can't say they're all coherent with each other, can you?
No.
No. And the reality boxes within these incoherent ones, social factors, are not coherent with each other. So these greater powers that require a wide, massive coherency are hypothetically possible, but only if they become coherent.
In the United States, if everything you're talking about is going to be accepted at an earlier date, is it necessary to associate the power of prayer with God?
Paul, you can answer that one too.
Well,
I think
the use of the term prayer implies that you understand some higher power is involved.
Not necessarily.
Well, I think that's kind of a traditional understanding. It doesn't necessarily mean that what you're doing in prayer couldn't be pulled out of a religious context, but then we don't have a real word for that, I don't think, unless Ingo can think of one.
No, we don't. We don't have a lot of words we need. I think God is wonderful. The concept of it is wonderful.
So do I.
Terrific. And but down here, there's just too much incoherency going on, and if we can't correct incoherency into something coherent, then we just have to trudge along in this dreadful, dreadful social situations that we're trapped in right now. God certainly means no boundaries and no bull. I have a match cover here that says that. And no boundaries means that there's great coherency amongst everyone, all beings. And no bull means there are no lies, at least.
Well, I'm not sure.
So we're far from that in a way.
Well, I'm not sure that was well said, but I'm not sure it was to answer my question. My question was a hot potato, really. It's that if we want this entire concept accepted, aren't we going to have to continue in the U.S., being the nation we are and believing as we believe, that it's associated with God? And that's much more likely to get this work accepted in the current social religious climate in this country, isn't it?
I see where your question is going now. In fact, I think that maybe just the opposite of that. I think, although I'm religious and believe in God, to make this successful, you almost have to stand it aside from God. And the reason is because everybody, well, I won't say everybody, but there are so many different notions of what it means when you say God, and you won't get anybody to agree on that. And so you almost have to extract it out of that debate before you'll get people to start agreeing, I think.
Well, all right, let me ask you this. If there were some tests performed, I know there have been certainly tests with regard to prayer, and then a group that was prayed for when they didn't know they were being prayed for versus, another group that was not prayed for. Now, what they didn't try was a group of very religious people praying for one group of people, and then a group of agnostics or atheists concentrating in their very best spiritual manner, not involving God, but nevertheless concentrating on healing these people, using the power of their brains, their living brains, to heal these people. Now, if such an experiment were conducted, what would you think would be the result? Do you think that there would be as much healing by those who were using the conduit of what they called God versus those who were just using the power of the living brain and not connecting it with a God?
Right. Now, expressed that way, I think that the religious folks would probably have more effect because they actually would probably have a stronger belief. But the interesting thing in the prayer station, you're absolutely right. They have not done that particular control experiment, which would be very interesting.
And I bet they won't either.
You should talk to Dr. Gerald Epstein about this.
Oh?
It's his, he's America's leading expert in mental imagery. And that's his field.
I mean, we do have yogis that can modify their heartbeat, do all kinds of interesting things.
That's biofeedback, yes.
Yeah.
Elmer Green.
Yes,
About that.
Yes.
Well, I like to step outside of the prescribed categories about how to think of things, There's an old adage now in Hollywood that says you got to think outside the box in order to get bigger and better movies. And The Economist just ran an advertisement on sides of buses here in New York saying, think outside the duodecahedron.
Oh. Did they really?
Oh, yeah. And so, the idea that we're trapped in our reality boxes is getting to the point where people realize they have to start thinking outside of them. And I think this is one of the most significant steps forward that I've seen in my whole life. Because everybody loves their own reality boxes,
Oh, yes. Well, are you looking forward to going down to Texas?
Who, me?
Yeah, sure. You're Ingo. You're the one who's going to be the big new speaker down there. So
I'm trying to rise to the challenge.